In the previous episode in our series on the rise of Sigmar and the human empire, we learned how the leader of the Unberigan people managed to unite the human tribes into said empire. However, almost immediately, it was attacked by the Greenskins. Welcome to our episode on the Battle of Blackfire Pass, one of the most famous battles of the Warhammer Fantasy Battles universe. Soon you'll get the chance to play the countless campaigns of the Warhammer universe yourself in the upcoming game Total War Warhammer 3, the sponsor of this video, releasing February 17th. This final part of the Total War Warhammer trilogy brings unprecedented strategic scale featuring 4 new factions of Chaos, Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh and Tzeentch, and for the first time players Kislev and Cathay, adding to previous rosters to create the largest selection of legendary heroes, gargantuan monsters, flying creatures and magical powers the series has ever seen. Total War's signature combination of turn-based grand strategy and action-packed real-time battles brings the world of Warhammer to life. It offers a huge single-player campaign with iconic Warhammer races, units and characters, and now lets you play together with synchronous co-op for up to 8 players, and if you're new to the franchise, there's now a specially made beginner's prologue to teach you the game. Pre-order the game or purchase in the first week after February 17th to get the Ogre Kingdoms race pack as an early adopter bonus. Will you conquer your demons or command them? Dwarven allies, who had been fighting a titanic host of greenskins for 2 years, reported that they were forced to pull back to defend their mountain holds, and were no longer able to prevent the orcish march east of the World's Edge Mountains, ready to bring the world of men to a bloody end. Time was short, and so Sigmar summoned all of the rulers and warriors he had won to his side during the previous decade: Marbad, Aloysius, Krugar, Freyr, Sigurd, and all the rest. Before spring came in -1 IC, the greatest army that the lands of men had ever seen gathered at Reckdorf, where the kings of the various tribes pledged allegiance to Sigmar, ready to confront the existential greenskin threat under his banner. The only tribes that refused this call to arms were the marsh-dwelling Teutones and the Bretonii, who migrated across the Grey Mountains. The army of 11 realms marched east at a measured pace, reasoning that the snows had not yet thawed. Scouts were dispatched to discern precisely what the Greenskins were up to. But panicked outriders returned with news that the Orcs, united under the warlord Urgluk Bloodfang, and uncountable in number, were already en route to the Blackfire Pass, a crossing cut west to east through the World's Edge Mountains. The humans quickened their pace. The army of humanity managed to climb and block the narrowest 2-mile-wide section of the pass before the Greenskins got there, and were joined by the dwarves of King Kurgan. The ground before Sigmar's unified army was a rocky plain that gradually sloped on a downward incline, becoming even more uneven with each eastward step. That was the ground the Greenskins would have to climb to reach the army of men. To either flank were the progressively sloping valley sides, leading to the massive peaks of the World's Edge Mountains. They formed a barrier that would force the Orcs into a frontal assault, and render their overwhelming numbers far less relevant. There were also a number of boulders and outcrops scattered across the pass, between which Sigmar anchored the rock-solid linchpin of his army. These were the assorted line infantry of the many tribal monarchs who had accompanied him, together with the Unberigan ruler's greatest foreign ally. There were Endel slingers, Ostrogoth blade master units, and Cherison wildmen on the left, elite Unberigan spearmen, stalwart heavily armed dwarves, and kilted Udossa warriors in the center, and the battle-tested warriors of the southeast, Burgundians, Merregans and Menegoths on the right. Deployed immediately in front of the primary battle line were the crack Unberigan plate-clad cavalry, almost all armed with heavy lances. Only the infamous White Wolves unit, led by the king's personal bodyguard Alfgeir, refused to take up the lance, instead electing to wield heavy warhammers. To the flanks of this shock cavalry force were the famous skirmishing riders of the Telutan tribe, lightly armoured and armed with bows and spears. Behind the ranks of infantry were several archer blocks of the Cherisons and Unberigans, ready to rain death on the Greenskins from afar. Sigmar also had two unconventional weapons at his disposal. Having pushed their way to the forefront of the army, beyond even the cavalry, were King Otwin and his drug-fueled Thuringian berserkers, arrayed in a loose line. Some wielded twin swords, others brutal axes, and other weapons of evisceration. Sigmar knew that he could not truly control these maddened warriors when the battle started, and made contingencies to use them in the best way possible. The second of Sigmar's wonder weapon contingents were several hundred magnificent Asaborn scythed chariots under the command of the king's flame-haired one-time lover, Queen Freya. Fully trained in the use of their vehicles, and armed with both bows and spears, they were initially deployed in front of the right flank. Behind the line in its entirety were a series of siege catapults, artillery designed to crush entire units of greenskin flesh into mulch. After a short time of waiting, a truly putrid stench struck the forces of mankind, blown in by easterly winds. It was the all-too-familiar reek of sweat, dung, and rotten corpses. In other words, the greenskins were near. Just an hour following the army's deployment, the invading menace appeared, advancing up the valley in their hundreds of thousands and in relatively organized formations, for greenskins at least. The mass of this annihilating horde was made up of orc warriors, wielding rusted, blood-soaked choppers of all kinds, and devious goblins flitting back and forth between the ranks. On the slopes to either flank were more goblins, mounted either on blood-maddened wolves or colossal spiders. Interspersed among the army were massive trolls, and above it rode its gargantuan war boss, Urgluk Bloodfang, atop his ferocious wyvern. The war boss swooped low above his innumerable army and raised his axe, wreathed in malign green flame, to signal the attack. It was followed by an ear-splitting cacophony of blood-mad orcish bellows as the front ranks of the greenskin horde jogged in the direction of Sigmar and his defenders. Seeing their hated enemies on the move, Otwin and his Thuringian berserker host returned a shout of rage and then wantonly launched themselves at the orcs. Although numerically inferior to their savage foe, Otwin's unhesitating assault was ferocious without peer. His frothing berserkers, drunk on their herbal infusions, carved a deep wound into the greenskin vanguard, inflicting many times more casualties than they suffered. But they were suffering. Uncaring of the strategic situation, the Thuringians punched ever deeper into the greenskin vanguard and were therefore swiftly surrounded. Beset on all sides, Otwin's assault force started taking massive losses. Observing the Thuringian king's struggle, Freya and her 200 Asaborn chariots barreled directly toward the enemy in a staggered line, unleashing volley after volley of lethally accurate arrows as they went. The warrior queen's orders from Sigmar were clear: help relieve Otwin by any means necessary, and she would do just that. After inflicting a great deal of damage with bow and arrow, the Asaborn scythed chariots wheeled around in perfect order and sped along the greenskin line, ripping the enemy apart with their blades, while the riders thrust and threw spears. At the same time, Sigmar and his trusted companions, Wulfgar and Pendrag, led the elite Unberigan heavy cavalry in a full-scale charge, crashing into the mass of greenskins that had encircled the Thuringians with lances couched. Sandwiched between the cutting blade of Freya's scythed chariots and the crushing hammer that was Sigmar's cavalry charge, and bombarded by arrow volleys from behind the human line, the greenskin vanguard broke. Its wounded and scattered survivors retreated in disorder back to their main line. The second orcish advance was now beginning. Unlike the previous probing attack, this time the war boss's horde pushed forward en masse across the entire width of the pass. On the flanks and the slopes, goblin, wolf and spider riders moved toward the lighter Telutan cavalry and assorted skirmishers manning Sigmar's wings. A force of heavy greenskin chariots, crude imitations of their elegant Asaborn counterparts and pulled by massive boars, shot out of the main horde straight at the Burgundians. Some were sent careening into rocks by archery fire and destroyed, but most of the ramshackle vehicles smashed into King Sigurd's ranks. The greenskin vehicles struck deep into the Burgundians, slashing through rank after rank of their ordered warriors. The line convulsed, wrapped around the orcs, and slew them in short order. But the beleaguered warriors were unable to reorder their formation before another dreadful weapon was unleashed against them. Greenskin artillery let loose, launching titanic boulders at Sigmar's right center in a concentrated barrage and crushing dozens of men with each strike. Provoked to panic by the terrifying rain of missiles, a great many Burgundians routed, opening ragged holes in the army of mankind before contact was even made. Adroitly reacting to the potential danger, King Kurgan Ironbeard shifted a portion of his stout Dwarven warriors over to cover the gap. Signalled to do so by Sigmar, Wulfila of the Udasa strode to Kurgan's side with his own kilted fighters, driving his standard into the ground as a statement of intent. There would be no retreat from that spot. Wulfila would either triumph or die. Sigmar's formation stabilized in the nick of time. As the gulf slammed shut between the Dwarves and Udasa, the two armies clashed. As though scenting weakness in the recently patched wound in Sigmar's line, the greenskin menace assaulted it with especially savage ferocity. The defenders were more than up to the task. The Dwarven soldiers of Kurgan, whose race had been blood enemies of the orcs for uncounted centuries, fought with cool efficiency, methodically culling each foe without quarter. To their side, Wulfila's warriors fought just as effectively, cutting the greenskin push to pieces with massive broadswords. All along the width of Blackfire Pass, the races of orc and human fought in a desperate struggle for the fate of tomorrow. In just the first minutes of combat, virtually all of the first ranks of both sides were chewed up by the merciless melee before the central clash ground to a bloody stalemate. It was on the flanks where the first true breakthrough came. On Sigmar's extreme right, King Marcus came under sustained assault by ravening packs of goblin wolf riders. These grim warriors of the invaded southeast realm of the Menegoths had suffered much at greenskin hands during the previous year's war, and so simply lowered their spears in good order and met the oncoming wolves with glacial calm. Here and there a wolf would get through, brutally killing its unfortunate victim, but the vast majority were impaled on iron spear tips, mauled by the king's hunting hounds, or otherwise destroyed. As though revenging the annihilated wolf riders, colossal greenskin war engines began bombarding the Menegoths with a deadly and concentrated hailstorm of massive iron javelins, every one cleaving through a tightly packed spear formation and reaping a terrible toll of warriors. Although courageous in the face of a terrible enemy, this airborne death was more than the Menegoths could take, and they began running for their lives. All of a sudden, the character of the battle changed. Sniffing blood in the water, the greenskin advance instinctively drove towards this newly opened weak point, angling the line like a hinge on a gate, which was the solid left flank and center of Sigmar's army. The situation of Sigmar's right was getting worse by the second. Without the Menegoths on their extreme flank, their Merrigan allies received a fresh assault from both the front and the sides. It was clear that their resistance would falter sooner or later, and it was up to Sigmar to act before it did. Unbergen and Endel reinforcements, led by Sigmar, counterattacked, reversing the course of the battle there and stabilizing the right flank, at the cost of King Marbad's life. Despite yet another small triumph, it was becoming increasingly clear to Sigmar that there was absolutely no hope of victory. All of mankind's bravery and skill, considerable as it had been, would be swamped beneath the inexorable greenskin tide. There was only one path to victory now. It is said in legend that Sigmar leapt without hesitation into the central mass of orcs. Gal Maraz, thrumming with ancient magical energies, crushed and bludgeoned greenskins by the dozen. Even the famously belligerent orcs scrambled to be away from this titan of war, opening up a great empty circle around Sigmar. At the same time, the army of mankind, inspired by the prowess of its leader, launched a final desperate charge. It would never be enough, but Sigmar's rampage had its intended effect. Drawn to the greatest warrior on the battlefield like a moth to a flame, Urgluk Bloodfang descended on his wyvern, which he ordered to devour Sigmar outright. Despite suffering wound after wound at the hands of the Greenskin warlord and its baleful mount, Sigmar's hammer slew the great beast, bringing Urgluk to personal combat in the sight of both armies. The vile colossus managed to seize Sigmar and almost crushed his skull, but the king found an opening, seized Galmaraz, and, as he had done at Astophan Bridge 15 years before, crushed his adversary's skull to dust. Like a formidable but fragile archway whose keystone had been removed, the Greenskin horde, deprived of its all-powerful war boss, and faced by what appeared to be a human god of war, fell apart and routed. Even as the bruised army of mankind continued its renewed charge, individual orc captains turned on one another like the beasts they undoubtedly were, jostling for command or to be first out of danger. Asaborn chariots and the army's cavalry ran down thousands more greenskins until sunset, while the remainder scattered into the Badlands of the east. The Battle of Blackfire Pass was won. Celebration and relief fused with sorrow and grief. The enormity of such a victory was hard to take in, but so much had been sacrificed to achieve it. As the pyres of a great funeral, celebration and relief fused with sorrow and grief. The enormity of such a victory was hard to take in, but so much had been sacrificed to achieve it. As the pyres of a great funeral ceremony burned to send King Marbad and all the fallen warriors to Ulrich's Hall, the surviving monarchs of men knelt at Sigmar's feet as one, proclaiming him the rightful emperor of the newly founded Empire of Man, the people and lands of which owed their survival to him. Although Sigmar's project had been a success, that was just the beginning of the wars he would have to fight, and the next episode in this series is imminent, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, this goes a long way to help us in the eyes of the almighty algorithm. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to see what you think about this video, and which videos you hope to see in the future. Your feedback is very important to us. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.